Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using a My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. For this layout, I'm using this beautiful piece of chipboard that was included in the kit. I love when they include chipboard in the kits, and I usually cut it into pieces, but I decided that for this layout, since it was a frame, that I was going to go ahead and use it as a frame and put my picture behind it. I have a couple of different shades of purple embossing powder that I wanted to use, and I was comparing the colors that I have to the pattern papers and to the flower that you see off to the right, just to see which colors I thought went best with the elements that I'm going to use on the page. I realized that there were a lot of different shades of purple in both the pattern papers and the embellishments, so I decided to just pick out the colors that I liked, and I had a feeling that everything would match once it was all put together, or at least, if not match, go together well. I believe that the first color that I used was a wow embossing powder called Niagara Blues, and I thought that this was a really pretty shade of purple to start out with. I heat emboss the top, and then I will rotate it and heat emboss the bottom. Before I started adding the embossing powder, I gessoed the entire frame. I used a sponge and I just dabbed on a little bit of gesso, and then once that was dry, I was able to start with the embossing. For this layout, I used a liquid adhesive that I have. I like the way it comes in a bottle and you can just dab it on with the dauber that's built in, but I often use the Versamark pads, and you could just kind of press whatever you want to emboss into those, and they work really well too. But for this layout, my plan was to use a couple of different embossing powders, so I wanted to be able to control the adhesive a little bit better, and I find that I can do that with this dauber. And I got this in Michael's a while back. I don't know if they still have it, but I'm sure that other manufacturers must make something similar. They also have embossing pens if you want to get really precise with where you want your embossing powder to go, and I occasionally use those too. I'm not going to include footage of me adding all of the embossing powder to the frame. I added a number of different colors. I was kind of experimenting. I wanted to see how it would look with layering colors on top of each other. In the end, I feel that the frame looks like it's two different colors. It's a little bit of a lighter color all around the edges, and then in the center I used a slightly darker color. And it makes a subtle difference. I don't think it made a huge difference because the colors were kind of close, but I do really like the look of the embossed frame, and I think that embossing is just a great way to add another texture to your layout. The other embossing powders that I used were made by Recollections. One is called Vintage Lilac and the other one is called Vintage Pink. And then I also used one more embossing powder called Vintage Glory, made by the Powder Keg. And that's the darker color that I use around the inside area of the frame. I think one of the few drawbacks to embossing powders is that you can't mix them together like you can paint. You can layer them on top of each other, and sometimes you can get different effects and different colors that way. But I find that I have to have a lot of different colors on hand in order to be able to match the project that I'm doing. But I've been scrapbooking for a long time, and I've slowly been building up my stash. So I don't have all the colors, but I have a number of colors now. Although there is one more workaround for that. You can always get clear embossing powder and put that over paint. So that way you could have the look of embossing powder without having to have all those different colors on hand. The frame is complete, and as I said, I'm going to put my photo behind the frame, but you can see there are a lot of areas that you'll be able to see through, so I wanted to back that part of the frame with pattern paper, and I picked this pretty pattern paper from the kit to go behind the frame. So I used my pencil and I drew some marks to show me where to cut the paper. I had to keep checking the paper against the frame, and I had to do a little bit of trimming, but I finally got the hole in the center of the paper the correct size and shape to layer behind the frame. So then I added some gel glue to the back of it, and then I attached that down to the chipboard. I pressed the paper against the chipboard and I allowed it to dry, and now I'm going to layer it on top of my photo. And this is a photo of my daughter, Julia. I have scrapbooked so many pictures from this day. We went to the Magic Gardens in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I got a lot of really nice pictures, and I just love to scrapbook that day. I'm working on my background paper now. I'm using a stencil that I had in my stash. I like the way it had some vines on it, and I'm going to be including some kind of vine-looking flowers on this layout. So I'm using the stencil along with the Distress Oxide called Stormy Sky. And this is just a little subtle touch in the background. It's not going to be super visible in the final product, but I like the idea of adding a little something extra to the background. I always like to add a little touch, and I'm glad that this was a subtle touch because I add a lot of other embellishments on the page, and so it gets to be very busy. So I'm glad that I didn't go too crazy with too much going on in the background. Since I know that the photo and the frame are going to go somewhere on the left-hand side of the layout, I'm trying to put the vines kind of coming out from behind the photo, or that's what I had in mind anyway as I was adding the stenciling to the layout. And I'm sorry, I have no idea who the manufacturer is for this stencil. I got this secondhand, but I love the way this has some larger flowers, and then there's a smaller branch with smaller flowers on it to the right of the bigger ones. And I like the way I can combine those two in order to make some kind of cool looking branch clusters. And I also like the way the branches aren't just the same pattern repeating itself in the exact same way throughout the stencil. There's a little bit of variation to each section of that big branch on the stencil. So these are the gorgeous fussy cut pieces that I'm going to be using on this layout. I think there are also some ephemera pieces mixed in here too. The April kit had a beautiful combination of papers. Some were from Prima Marketing, some were from a company called Memory Lane. And as soon as I saw those papers, I knew I was going to be doing a lot of fussy cutting. They were so beautiful, and they had so many gorgeous pictures of flowers on them, which is one of my favorite things to fussy cut out. This first item that I'm attaching down to my layout, this was cut out of one of the Memory Lane pattern papers, and I like the way it makes a corner that is in the opposite corner from where I'm going to put my photo. And I knew I wanted to put lots of flowers to the left and under my photo, but I added a lot more than I had initially planned to, but I was really happy with the way that it looked, so I was okay with it. So I attached those two fussy cut pieces together. That's going to be the base for where I have all of the flowers. I'm going to attach all of them nearby or on top of those flowers. First, I want to attach down my photo. So I'm trying to be careful to make sure that it's straight and lined up, and that I moved it a little bit anyway, but I think it's still straight. And these flowers that I'm adding now, they are resting on top of the frame. So I add a little bit of foam to the edges so that the entire piece will sit even on the frame and it won't sag in the part where it's not sitting on the frame. And I had to double up the foam and have two layers, otherwise it wasn't sitting correctly. The fun foam is fairly thin, so having two layers of it doesn't add too much bulk to my page. And then next I add some ATG adhesive to the foam, and then I place it on the layout. And the pieces that I'm using now, these were also fussy cut from one of the Memory Lane papers. And it was these flowers with all the touches of purple that made me choose that color to emboss the frame. But there were also a lot of touches of purple on the Prima collection that's in this kit too. The nice thing is with these kits, the papers are perfectly matched, so you don't really have to think for yourself, which I really like. I like having that thought process already done for me. I'm, of course, going to put some butterflies on this layout. I know that the larger one is a die cut piece. The smaller one might be too, but I also could have fussy cut that out. And then I'm using more of those fussy cut flowers, and I'm placing them all around the frame. And as soon as I like where I have one, I attach it down, because I have a very bad habit of picking up my layout to look at it, and then things will fall off of the page. So I am just going to attach things down as soon as I feel good about them. I love the little bird that I just placed on the layout, and there were several of these birds throughout the collection, and so I have a lot of birds on my layouts for April. I love adding birds to layouts. I don't know what it is. Birds and butterflies. Love that. And I like the way there was another bird facing in the other direction, so I have one bird at the top of the frame, one at the bottom, and I use some foam to pop both of them up, give them a little bit of dimension. And then I did the same thing to the butterflies. I always love to pop up butterflies on layouts. And then I did the same thing to the smaller butterfly. I popped it up and attached it down to the background. Now I'm adding some of the beautiful flowers that we got in the April kit to the layout. Not only did we get these really pretty flowers in lots of gorgeous colors, but we also got a whole bunch of little daisies, which go great with both the Prima and the Memory Lane collection. There were lots of daisies in there, and I think they're just such a nice extra touch to add to the layouts. I love the way they're white, so they don't stand out too much. They just, I think, are a great addition to this collection. I use Golden Brand Heavy Matte Gel Medium to attach my flowers down. I find that it takes a little bit of time to dry, but it's a very strong adhesive. I don't have to worry about my flowers falling off the layout at a later time. So I tend to use that when I have flowers like this I want to attach down. There were some small pink flowers, and I thought the layout could use a little bit of pink because I have the large pink flower and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't the only pink thing on the page, so I added those 3 smaller pink flowers. And then I started to add some more butterflies to the page, and these are a little bit smaller. And then I had some smaller flowers and smaller leaves that I also wanted to work into that large cluster. I have all the big elements in place, and then I think that adding those tiny little pieces helps them to look more complete. There were a lot of very, very tiny images, flowers and leaves that were on the pattern papers, and I cut all of them out because I knew that those little touches can sometimes come in really handy if you want to fill in a spot or add a certain color to the layout. So I will cut everything out of a piece of pattern paper, and I think that for this layout they came in really handy. And then once again, as I'm finding a spot that I want to put them, I'm adding some adhesive and I'm attaching them down because there are so many little pieces I don't want to forget. At the top of the layout, I did a little bit of rearranging of leaves just so there'd be a little bit of open area above the photo. I didn't want the 2 clusters to come too close to touching each other. And then I added a couple more little elements. I added a little leaf, and then I added a white flower, just kind of tucked that in at the top. And then I started working on my title. I'm going to use this sentiment for my title. It says, "To plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow." And even though we were at a place called the Magic Gardens, it isn't actually a garden, but because my daughter had all of those flowers painted behind her and the layout kind of looks like a garden, I thought that this would be a good title for this layout. And then I used a corner rounder to give the card that I cut out a little bit more of a finished look. And just like I did to all the other elements on the page, I'm inking the edges with some Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I'm going to tuck a butterfly right behind the title, so I inked the edges of that too. And then I decided I wanted to pop up the title on some foam, so I'm mounting the title on a little bit of thicker cardstock. This will make it a little bit more sturdy for when I pop it up on the foam. And then after I've applied the foam, once again, I add some adhesive and I attach the title in the lower right-hand corner with that butterfly peeking out from behind it. I wanted to attach a couple more butterflies to the page. I thought I could use one in the lower left-hand corner. And then I went around to some of those other elements on the page that I had put in place, but I had not yet attached down. And that could be danger for me, especially when I think they are attached down. They could go flying off the page. And then here's another little butterfly that I'm adding among the flowers in the upper right-hand corner. Since there were so many embellishments in the lower left-hand corner, I thought that I should at least have a little bit of yellow in the upper right-hand corner so that it would be balanced, at least color-wise. And then I started adding more flowers. I thought that it would look nice to add a little something more to that title cluster, so I tucked a number of daisies behind the butterfly at the top. And then I put a little branch underneath the title, but I'm going to end up taking that away and adding something different there. There were some leaves I was going to add to the top of the layout, but I decided to add them at the top of the frame because I felt like I needed some leaves at the right-hand side of the flowers on the top of my photo frame. I think it kind of finishes off that end of that big swirl of flowers going around the frame. Now I'm adding some Finnabair heavy white gesso to the tips of those dimensional flowers to give them some highlight. I'm using a small brush and I'm dabbing just a little bit of the gesso onto the tips of the flowers. I also add a little bit of white to one of the daisies, but then I realized you can't see that at all. So I decided to just leave the daisies as they were. And now I want to start adding some other textures to the layout. So I start off with some pearls. I'm using off-white pearls, and I just put 3 on each of the flowers. I use a variety of sizes, with the largest size being on the largest flower and then the smaller sizes being on those 2 smaller flowers. I'm using some glossy accents, which is a great adhesive for these pearls to attach them down. And now I'm adding some centers to the butterflies. I'm using some purple half pearls. These are self-adhesive, and I'm adding those to all of those yellow butterflies that are on the page. And although I said the pearls were self-adhesive, and they usually do stay down pretty well, I will occasionally find that they fall off, so I often will reinforce them with some glue, not always, but in this case it was very easy to just put a little line of glue down the centers of the butterflies and then add the pearls on top of the glue. Once I added the purple pearls to the centers of the flowers, I began adding some branches. As I said, I fussy cut out every last image from one of the pattern papers, and so I wanted to incorporate these branches into my large cluster that's in the lower left-hand corner of the layout. There were a lot of these branches in the upper right-hand corner, but I thought that it would be a good balance to the page if I added some to the other cluster. Often the flower packs will have these little spirals, and I thought that these were perfect to use on this particular layout. I love the way that they looked on either side of the flower cluster. I tucked 2 on one side and 2 on the other side, and then I used some gel glue to attach them into place. If you've been following me for a while, you probably know that I love to add jewels to my layouts. I have some pearls, but now I'm going to take it a step further and add some jewels. I wanted to embellish the frame, and I found that I had this sheet of really cool sparkly jewels. They have a little bit of a pink cast to them. I think even now you could see how much sparkle they have, and I was thinking that would be the perfect addition to this layout. So I'm using these along with some glossy accents. Because I'm adding the jewels on a frame that's covered in embossing powder, I definitely wanted to add some glue to hold them in place. So that was a little quick there. I just wanted to show you that I added some Distress Oxide to the edges of the whole page. And then I started attaching down some other elements underneath the title. I decided to add a little flower cluster under there just so that it would look a little bit more finished. And then I also added a tiny little pink butterfly to the title. And now the layout is complete, and here are a few close-ups. I wanted to give a big shout out to my sister. Happy birthday, Marie. I hope you have a fantastic birthday. My sister is such an amazing person, and she's also a huge supporter of my channel, and I just hope she has a wonderful, wonderful birthday. If you're interested in ordering a subscription to one of the My Creative Scrapbook kits, all the information you need is on their website, and there's a link in the description box. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.